Enjoyment is incredibly important because it's the best metric of efficiency. When I used to think about empowering people, what happened was I was the one empowering them, which means that they, by their nature, were not empowered. Most people, they want to do great work. It's just about me being clear. Everybody thinks about time management. I think about energy management.
Discipline and consequences over the last year have been the biggest source of preoccupation and pain.
Why do teenagers hate parents? Kids end up being what you tell them they're going to be.
Hey everyone, I'm here today with someone I have been looking forward to interviewing for years. Someone you've probably heard about if you've been following me for any length of time. It's one of the people who's been most impactful on my entrepreneurial journey, my personal growth journey, on many aspects of my life for years now, for 5 or 6 years. And that person is Joe Hudson. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Tiago.
We're here in Sonoma at a beautiful mastermind retreat. We've just spent the past few days going deep on challenges and problems we're facing, also opportunities, what we're learning, all that kind of stuff. So this is very top of mind. The challenge I seem to be facing across all areas of the business is how to empower leaders in my organization and the wider ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think part of that is due to having kids now. So the major thing that's changed over the past couple of years has been that I finish every weekday, my work day, at 2 p.m. on the dot, which is when I have to leave to go pick up both kids.
Oh, wow.
Which feels, compared to how I used to work, like a half day. So I'm working half days and definitely no evenings and no weekends. So I actually feel like we have great work-life balance. But I also have many ambitions, and those ambitions are growing because I'm now reaping the success of all these years that I've worked so hard, which is kind of how it should work, right? And those two things are creating a tension that's growing. Ambition on one side, family on the other. It feels like they're in contradiction a lot of the time. And I've always admired how you seem to really empower people, both within the organization that officially work in there, but also this kind of inner circle of like friends, collaborators, coaches, facilitators.
Yeah. How
do you think about empowering people in that way?
In general, I don't think about empowering people, which is odd. When I used to think about empowering people, what happened was I was the one empowering them, which means that they, by their nature, were not empowered because they needed me to empower them. It's a kind of a weird like twist, but when that twist happened, I was like, oh, well then what is the stance that I can take that most helps them be themselves, to be actually the way that they are naturally? And we all want autonomy. We all want to feel capable. We all want to do a good job. Nobody's like, God, I hope I can go to work today and do a shit job, right? Like what's my stance that's the most effective? And so I tried many stances, and what I found, which is still fascinating to me, the stance that is most useful is to be really clear on my wants and to focus on my own enjoyment and have expectations that are like, I will say to employees when I come in, I'm like, our bottleneck in the business is my time. And so your whole job in some way is to make my life easier because that's how we're going to grow the business. And I started saying that, and all of a sudden I noticed people started getting very empowered. And so that was like, it was mind-boggling at first, but that's the stance that I take. And so as far as your question goes, I don't really think about empowering people. Instead, the way that I find people feel most empowered is when I'm really clear about what I want and give them a ton of autonomy to do it the way that they want to do it, as long as I'm clear about my wants. And then they are like naturally just empowered. And most people, they don't, by their nature, they're not like, oh, I want to do a job that the person who's paying me money thinks sucks, right? Like they want to do great work. And so it's just about me being clear is what I noticed. Like that, it's just natural for people to want to do great work if they're doing work that they want to do, which is part of the priority. Like I will never hire somebody who is hired to do something that they don't want to do. Like horrible.
So you said you noticed that they started becoming empowered when you focused on your wants.
Yeah.
What was that before and after? What was the change that you saw, that you noticed?
So somehow I thought my job was to take care of folks, right? Like to like make their job easier. And there's truth to that. There's no doubt there's truth to that, but it's a reciprocal, it's, you know, if you look at a lot of the giving that happened and in philanthropy, and when you give without an energetic exchange, it doesn't usually go very well. It's kind of guilt giving is what I would call that.
What do you mean by an energetic exchange?
I'm in Nicaragua and there's these Canadians who have come down and they're like giving clothes to poor people and feeling great about themselves. And I was like, oh, well, what would make you not exchange the clothes and the stuff that you're giving for, say, them conserving turtles or anything that would like allow them to feel like they're earning the thing? So if you just give in one way, then you're basically teaching people they need support. And if you give in a way that they can feel like they're energetically, literally an exchange of my physical energy or my mental energy for your, and so that creates like something where they can feel more empowered instead of feeling like they are dependent. And so it's a very similar situation. It's very important that there's like this energetic exchange. It's not just money. It's like everybody who works for me knows that I'm there for them without a doubt. And I care about them as a person. And if they're, I always say family first and all sorts of things where I just want them to be happy, healthy humans. But it's not my job to make them happy and healthy. And it's not my job to intervene and say, this is what I think you need to be happy or healthy. It's their job to come to me and say, this is what I need to be happy and healthy. And so the switch, I think the question that you asked was, what was it like before and after? It's like when I got really clear with what I wanted, then they felt safe because they knew what to do. And then I was like, you figure out how to do it. Like you're smart, capable, and I'm like, and then the whole thing worked.
I can understand and accept that the founder and 100% owner is allowed to enjoy what they do, but it doesn't feel that way. That feels selfish. It feels indulgent. Is this something you encounter often with founders? Like, where would you look for the source of that?
Before I get into that, I want to just talk about how important enjoyment is. So the first thing is enjoyment is incredibly important because it's the best metric of efficiency. So if you think about a car and you're like, is the Lamborghini efficient? The answer is no. Is the like Honda Civic efficient? Yes. And the reason is because it takes less energy to run than a Lamborghini. It's not as fast, but we often mistake in business efficiency for speed. But efficiency is really energy. And so everybody thinks about time management. I think about energy management. And so if you're enjoying what you're doing, that is the best way to know that you're using your energy as efficiently as possible. So enjoyment is a gauge of efficiency. You know that you're going to get better work from the man sitting here like filming all this if he's enjoying himself. You know it's going to be like better product. You know that he's going to care more. You know he's going to be into it more. Similarly, I know that you're going to be into it more. You're going to be enjoying it more if you're going to be more creative, more everything if you're enjoying yourself. And if I care about your business, if I'm an investor in your business, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put $1 million into Tiago's business. What do I care about more? Do I care more about your enjoyment or do I care more about the camera person's enjoyment? Right? And then if I think about the other way, if I'm like, oh, the camera person's enjoying themselves, which great, does that make it more, how much more likely is it that makes you enjoying yourself? And then vice versa. If you're really enjoying this, how much more likely is it for everybody around you to really be enjoying it? And so for me, there's like that self-fulfilling virtuous cycle of enjoyment that happens. So your enjoyment influences other people's enjoyment, which is going to get better work. Your enjoyment's going to get better work for you. It's going to be more efficient use of energy, all that stuff. Like to the point in my business, recently I was working with somebody and it was not working out. And I said, I have this idea of what's happening. Like I asked you for this thing. You probably spent 6 hours doing this thing and you haven't enjoyed it. And she's like, yes. I was like, all right. So what I want you to do is never spend more than like 20 minutes on a thing like this And your only job isn't to say, how do I get it right? Your only job is to ask, how do I enjoy doing this task? And productivity just fucking exploded. It was crazy.
So then what my mind does is says, okay, but there's good kinds of enjoyment and bad kinds of enjoyment.
Okay, great. Tell me the bad kind.
Well, I can think of examples where, say, writing. I know when I'm enjoying writing, it's produces a good result. I have hundreds of case studies of that. But then I think of times, many times come to mind when I didn't enjoy every part of an experience, but I enjoyed some parts or I enjoyed the outcome at the end. And so then that makes me look for other situations where I can push through something difficult that I don't necessarily enjoy for something that's enjoyable at the end. How would you think about that?
So I think that the human mind really likes to create this idea that enjoyment is in what you're doing, not how you're doing it.
Say more.
So right now, in this moment, I just want you to enjoy yourself 5% more. We're doing the same thing. Now you just have a little more enjoyment. There's not just, I'm going to do only things I enjoy. There's also learning that I can enjoy the things that I'm doing. And how do I do the things in an enjoyable way?
So how, not what? How you're doing something?
It's both. But usually people just go, I'm going to solve enjoyment by a what, which never works. Right? If that would be the case, then like all the billionaires we know who can do anything they want would all be enjoying themselves, and they sure as fuck aren't. Right? Like, so enjoyment is partly how and partly what, and you have to, spend time on both sides of that equation. And that's actually what refines a business. I know for sure that if you and your team all really enjoyed every meeting that you ever had, your company would be growing and successful. I know that. And I know that if every time you and your team hated every meeting that you had, your company would be going down and to the left.
So enjoyment as an indicator of the overall kind of health of the company.
Yeah. Efficiency of the company, health of the company, quality of the product. When I was a venture capitalist, as an example, I would look for leading indicators on performance, because knowing that the quarter is bad after the quarter is over is a lot less effective than knowing if the quarter is going to be bad before the quarter's over, right? And so I looked at all the metrics, and one of the metrics that I found was, are the people in the divisions that we're looking at, are they happy to come to work on Monday? Just little shit like that.
How would you know that?
Oh, we did tiny pulses. Like we would do like little questionnaires, and it was a requirement to fill them out.
Fascinating. And that correlated with the performance of the company?
Oh yeah, you could just see like the sales is not doing well within the next quarter or two, their performance would drop. Or the engineering team, their enjoyment was down. It's like they're not going to meet their deadlines.
How do you know it's not the reverse causality? Like they're doing well and that's what makes them happy?
All I know is that one of them, I'm confident it's both. Meaning, I know that if you're not enjoying yourself, you're less likely to perform. I also know if you're not performing well, But what I know is the question of how do you increase performance in the engineering team sometimes leads to good results. How do you increase enjoyment in the engineering team always increases results. So I don't care too much about causality. What I care about is the lever I can pull to change shit. Because if you ask people in the engineering team, what do you need to enjoy the thing? They'll say, well, we want better results. Okay, well, what do we need to do to get better results? And they'll tell you. And then you can say, would you enjoy it then? And they'll be like, well, not exactly. We also need these other things. And
yeah, it feels like such an kind of, unfortunately, maybe unorthodox thing to bring into the conversation. Yeah. Like there's even like a kind of, I feel like a shamefulness or something around like wanting that and making that a priority, making it important.
Yes, for a lot of people it is. And so that goes to your question, which I've avoided to now, just to talk about how important enjoyment is. So typically somebody who doesn't enjoy, like it doesn't, where enjoyment, they think that they have to push through. I would call that an endurer quality, somebody who has to endure shit to get to something good, right? Let's say you had a very willful parent, and the willful parent was really trying to manage the kid, either through criticism or something like, and needed them. the only way the kid could psychologically survive is to resist, which is an endurance.
Because the parent is controlling them.
Right. So they have to find some sort of way to resist. And that resistance is endurance. So it's like, oh, I can't just enjoy life. I have to resist this thing so that I can be me, so I can get what I want. And so that's typically what creates. And I had a lot of endurance in my system. Like, so I thought I had to suffer to get anything I wanted. And this is often the case for people.
I see that completely in my dad. My dad modeled that. My memories are that a lot of the time he was fighting through something. Yeah. Fighting through travel, fighting through getting the dinner ready, fighting through us to get us ready for church on Sunday. Right. It was a lot of like fighting and like pushing through and kind of sacrificing.
And in their reality, whoever's that is, like, that's just truth. But then you can see somebody, you just go next door and then there's somebody else who's doing all that without fighting. Mm-hmm. So like, is it true? So that's, and that came from his, how he was parented, etc. But that's typically what creates and so if somebody has to fight, like, and here's where the guilt comes in. So your father had to fight through everything, as an example. So what happened when you were just enjoying yourself?
You felt kind of vaguely guilty.
That's right.
I must be doing something wrong.
Right. Because he felt some sort of resentment. Right. So usually if like I have to fight everywhere and this person just like is enjoying themselves and look at you, happy-go-lucky motherfucker, just like lollipops falling from heaven. Like, and you see that all the time in workplaces. Where one person's super efficient and one person's working hard, there's going to be that resentment because I have to struggle to do it. Like, you just get away with blah, blah, blah. And so then that's where the guilt comes from. And so now just enjoying yourself was wired and fired with guilt. So probably if your kids are really in a joyful situation, like maybe not, but depending on, you've done a lot of work, so this might not be the case anymore. But typically for other people who are in this, if the kids are in like this really joyful, ecstatic situation, they'll be like, oh, that's really great. That's cool. And then it's like annoying. Can you please quiet it down? Like that starts happening because you don't want to feel that enjoyment in yourself because it's so equated with guilt that you then with your kids.
We'll get to that topic very soon. That is in fact happening. I wanted to have you speak more on something you told me yesterday. The founder's interests are the most aligned with the company. Can you say more about that?
Like I said, if I'm an investor and I believe in the enjoyment principle, I want your enjoyment more than anybody else's. And because you're the person who has the most influence on the company, but you're the one who's most in touch with the needs of the company. If you're running the company, you know the needs of the company better than anybody else. The social media person knows their needs, knows the social media needs. The ops person knows the ops needs, but you know the needs of the company. So if you're in enjoyment, then I'm assuming that the whole company is more efficient. And I also know that everybody is if you're in enjoyment, then everybody can align behind you much more easily.
So this is interesting because, so you said that the founder is most in touch with the interests of the company, and also that the people that you work with are capable and smart and they can figure things out. Yeah. How are those things not in contradiction?
It's not actually. So that question requires you to think of the company as a hierarchy, which I don't think of companies as. I just think of them as roles, and your role is to know the needs of the company. Their role is to know the need of social media or YouTube or operations. Like that's the roles that's what they're focused on. That's what they're doing. That's their like part of the operation. That's their cog. You're just a cog. You're not like the whole fucking thing. You're just a cog like everybody else. Your cog just happens to be the cog in the center that like,
it's like the one powering all the others.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want that one wonky. Doesn't mean you're like a better super special cog. It just means you're just the cog that happens to have that role.
So social media is a great example. Yeah. So what if the social media person, and I find this is often the case, the way they enjoy running the social media, because they're probably creative, they have their own opinions, has nothing to do with what I enjoy our social media doing as a company? What if those two things are not, like our enjoyments are not aligned?
So in when that happens, I sit down and I'm like, okay, so our enjoyments have to be aligned, or we can't go further. Like we can't do this thing. And so there's a conversation about like, is there a way that we can both enjoy this? And usually if we find that, it's better than the way I would enjoy it or the way that they would enjoy it, typically. But you can't bail out of your enjoyment. But so what typically happens is I need it to be enjoyment, and I need you to have enjoyment, and then all of a sudden you think it's a dichotomy because fear comes in, because the idea is like the fear is I can't enjoy myself and have you enjoy yourself. And so the black and white thinking starts happening. And then power struggles, blah, 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 blah. But if you come into it with like, absolutely, we can find a way for me to enjoy it and you can enjoy it, and probably when we find that it's going to be a better solution, then it's a whole different kind of discussion that happens.
And then do you typically like compromise or blend those two things?
No,
or
never.
what does it look like
A new solution
altogether?
typically.
Interesting.
Compromise, nobody enjoys compromising.
Yeah.
Like I've been married for something, whatever it is now, 25 years. And like one of the things we never do is compromise. I'm going to just carve off a piece of myself to keep you happy. And you're just going to carve off a piece of yourself to keep me happy. There's 25 years later, there's fucking nothing left. I've just carved all the pieces off of myself. So instead it's like, no, we're just smart enough to find a way that this can work without a compromise.
So in your company, is there never a time where you just have to straight out assert your authority and just say, this is just the way it's going to be? Is it always just an evolving discussion?
No, absolutely. Nothing happens in my company that I don't want to have happen. So for instance, just as an example, I'm not going to allow myself to not enjoy doing my work. So if something's happening in the business that makes it so that I can't enjoy it, then it's not happening. So right in that alone, I have to be drawing boundaries. I have to be saying no to stuff. But the difference is I don't feel like I'm not coming up with a solution. I'm just saying this doesn't work.
You're just noting, observing that doesn't work.
Yeah, so like the most common conversation I have is, we just had that meeting. That didn't work for me. And they're like, oh, what makes it not work for you? This and this and this. Oh, and how did it work for you? Yeah, that was actually kind of shitty too, blah, 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 blah. Oh, how do we want to handle it next time?
Often my sort of fear of opening discussions is how long they take. Yeah. It feels like opening a can of worms. Yeah. Whereas I often feel I just know the answer, or I know what I want. Yes. And so I just try to short circuit that conversation by just saying, just do this. But you're doing something differently. You are being direct in the identification of your dissatisfaction. Yes. And then but then if they come up with proposed solutions that you are not okay with, do you just keep saying, I'm dissatisfied with that, I'm dissatisfied?
I mean, if that happens, that's true. But usually the way that I would do it instead is to say, like, let's agree on the problem that we're trying to solve, and let's agree on the solution criteria.
Say more.
If we agree on the problem, so this is the problem statement that I see, and then we talk about it, discuss it, see if it needs to be changed. And as we're changing it, we start looking at, these are part of the solution criteria that need to be met for that solution to work. So let's say, we need to double revenue. That's the goal. And then somebody says, nah, I mean, doubling revenue in what kind of time, how long, then maybe that changes the goal. But somebody else is like, yeah, but we can't do it if it doesn't match our values. Oh yeah, okay, so that becomes a solution criteria. But we can't do it if we're doing something dishonest. Okay, that's a solution criteria. We can't do it if doubling revenue costs us $500,000 to double revenue. Okay, so it has to cost this much. And then once that's all done, they can't make a decision. They can't do it in a way that doesn't agree with you because you've agreed on all the criteria. But the way they're going to do it, especially if they're an expert in that field, especially if they're in the weeds of that and you're not, their solution is going to be better than yours. And your thinking and all your creativity comes out in the solution criteria. So one of my solution criteria would be like, oh, you can't do this in a way that you don't enjoy it. And therefore, I am influencing the company far more profoundly than if I just say, do it this way.
And you just introduce that criterion right there in the discussion?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then I'll have a debate if they don't think that's the right criteria. It would be like, okay, And sometimes it changes and it gets more refined.
So back to that example of the social media person. Yeah. Let's say right there in a one-on-one conversation, you decide, you know, your enjoyment is not aligned. Do you then just the two of you come up with those solution criteria, or do you like call or bring it to a team meeting and have a wider discussion?
So I will have wider discussions. I think it's really important to get advice from the people who are willing to contribute towards the solution. But I don't get advice from people who aren't willing to contribute to the solution. So so the people I would say is like, who are the people who this affects and are willing to put in energy? Those are the people at the meeting. Because everybody has a freaking opinion. I care about the opinions of the people who it matters to, who are willing to invest in it. Again, it's that exchange of energy.
I'm noticing something else, which is I can now consider and start to accept that my enjoyment is acceptable. But the other fear I have is, because I always notice that I'm modeling everything, I'm a bit afraid of it becoming too out of control, that we all just do what we want or do what we like. Is solution criteria, maybe we should define that a little more. Like, is that the answer to I kind of feel like...
Oh my God, that sounds like heaven. Holy shit.
What?
If I could push a button and say everybody's just doing what they like in our business, I would be like, that's fantastic. The only reason I think that that's fantastic is because I trust our alignment. I know that we're all rowing in the same direction. I also don't believe there's a way for our team to enjoy what they're doing and be rowing in different directions. Have you ever been in a team like that? It sucks. You don't want to be a part of it. So to me, the fact that they're all enjoying it has to mean that they're all working together. And it has a common goal, and we want to do something together. We want to affect change in the world and blah, blah, blah.
This is so helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
It really is it's such a paradigm shift from everything I've ever been taught about business. Right. Everything.
Life. Yeah. It's not just business, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I have to suffer to make money. I have to sell a part of myself. I have to be a prostitute too. I have to have pain. You know, there's people who go to the gym who love going to the gym, and it's not a pain for them to exercise. And there are people who, oh my God, I got to go to the gym. This sucks. It's like, who do you think is going to be in better shape?
I want to make a bit of a turn to family. Yeah. Specifically kids, parenting. You've given me some great recommendations. The Listen book, Hand in Hand Parenting. Lauren and I have read it several times. It's become a big part of what we do. I've listened to a few of your podcast episodes, including your conversation with your daughter, which is very inspiring. But I still have questions. Specifically around discipline. Discipline and consequences over the last year have been the biggest source of preoccupation and pain. Yeah. Around a year ago, he was then 2.5, he's now 3.5. Like almost from 1 month to the next, his, I would say, like rebellious or a more assertive side came alive, like turned on. I love that. So actually, that's my first question. Like, what is that? What turned on when that started?
You know, I don't know. It didn't turn on. It went to 1. And by the time they're 16, it goes to 10. So you best fall in love with it. Yeah, I mean, their job is to their job is to push off the side of the pool. That's what a kid's job is, to create autonomy. I mean, if they didn't, then, they're going to be living at home and you're going to be wiping their ass when they're 40. That's horrible. So that's the job of the kid, is to start defining themselves. Like, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, like the dad not letting you define yourself creates that endurance. And so it's like your job as a parent is to allow them to discover who they are and themselves and to walk into their will. And their will is really important. I was just telling this to somebody here yesterday, which was, we did an odd form of schooling that I don't want to go into, but part of the thing that this school system did was, before they taught them how to read or write, They taught them how to be in their will. They taught them how to like be in their body and be able to control. It's not even control their will, but to like have harmony with their will. So it wasn't like they were being pulled around by it. And after that happened, then you would go and like start learning. And at the same time, this is like they're around 6, 7 years old, and my sister's kids are speaking 3 languages. And I'm like, God, my kids are fucked. Like, what did I do? And there's a CEO at the school, and he was brash. I loved him. And he was like, what the fuck, Joe? He's like, you can pay somebody to learn Spanish for you, but you can't pay somebody to have will. I was like, oh, it hit me. Like, oh, right. Like them knowing themselves, feeling solid in themselves, feeling embodied in themselves. That's the thing that you cannot hire someone to do. Now, that's the most important thing, is to teach them about that. Consequences, super useful for that. Boundaries, super useful for that. Stay close and insist, super useful for that. Discipline, I'm not a fan. Not a fan for that.
So I want to ask you more about discipline, but first say, what do you mean by will? What is will?
Their drive, their ambition. For us, it's like we want to go and create this, or teach this, or make this difference in the world. For them, it's I want to have the cookie. I want to get your attention. It is like that ambition and drive. And are they embodied? Is it all unified? And is it like integrated and moving in one direction? Or is it pulling? Am I leaving myself every time the will is there?
Is will basically your wants? Why wouldn't you say their wants?
I think you could. Yeah. The reason I used will is because that's how it was taught to me when I was like working this with the young ones, when my kids were young. Because you think about them as willful children. Oh, that's a willful child.
Which has a negative connotation.
Not to me. Like, I love willful. I particularly love, I have 2 girls. I love willful girls. Like, oh, it's so great.
They know what they want.
And they're in themselves. It's not just, so when they're really young, the way that the teachers taught us, which I thought was really good, is like you'd have a kid draw a picture of themselves. And are they just drawing a head, or are they drawing a body, or are they drawing feet? That actually lets you know how much they're in their body, how much they've integrated. So like when I was a kid, I had proprioception issues. I would like ran into stuff. If you saw drawings, I didn't have hands and feet. Sensory processing disorder. All of that would be a way of saying that like our will is in our body. We're still kind of all up here, and so our body isn't fully in. And so the idea is for us to be in our body. And when you're talking to somebody, and they're, as an example, like I'll actually face the camera for this. If you're talking to somebody, they're like, or if they're talking to somebody and they're in themselves, you know the difference. And so it's like, are you able to be in your body with your will at peace? Or is that like creating disjointed, or are you having to be really rigid to do it?
Wow, I think there's something for me here too. Looking at a list of like sensory processing issues, like the symptoms, recently I'm like, that's me. Like I recognize myself in so many of those.
Yeah, me as well. Like I did a lot of work, and some of it just naturally knew how to do by the time I was a teenager, which helped a lot, like juggling. There's a whole bunch of like interesting tricks, but with kids, it's really easy to do it when they're kids, and really helpful to do it when they're kids. And so this kind of schooling that I talked about, that was the thing. They were like, that has to be in place before we teach them. Before we put them in their head, they need to know how to be in their body.
This feels like a guilty confession, but anytime I'm in a meditation circle or program, whatever, and I mean, you said this, many other teachers, like what's going on in your body, there's never anything going on in my body. Like it's like pretty much blank. I can sort of like guess what might be there, or like kind of make something up or something, but I very rarely am able to produce an answer for, where is something in your body, where are you feeling it, what physical sensations. I'm often just like, I don't really know.
So typically what that means is that there wasn't any emotional safety. So if you, as a little kid, if you put like a quarter in one hand and a key in another hand, most kids, most adults will know which one's the quarter and which one's the key. If the person has been physically abused really badly, they can't tell the difference because they've literally stopped sensing that because it was too painful. Emotionally, the same thing happens. If it's emotionally not safe enough to feel the emotional system, then we cut it off. So for me, when I started to learn how to like live in my emotional body, I didn't know I wasn't feeling shit. Like I don't feel anything. And then it was like I actually had to use the mind to realize what I was feeling emotionally. So there would be things like, oh, that's binary thinking. That's fear. Oh, I need to make a decision. That's fear. You know, I would have to, oh, like my thinking is like my thoughts are becoming, how do I control the other person? That's anger. So I had to like notice how my thoughts were affected by the emotions to notice the emotions. And then I could start naming them, and then I could start feeling them. And then there's a whole evolutionary path to like how we get to emotional fluidity, which is the more free state. But anyway, so that's typically the reason why somebody can't feel their body. But there's a way to get there.
Could you say a bit more about that path? Like, what were some of the things you tried, the steps you took?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, when I was like young and I cried, for instance, my parents unfortunately felt like my tears were a commentary on their parenting, and therefore they took it very personally. They did not like that one bit, and so they used to make fun of me for crying. We're going to throw a pity party, smallest violin, all that bullshit. And then they used to actually take pictures of me, and so to make fun of me. And somehow or another, one of these pictures got into a photo album. And so when I was like 23, 24, I came across this picture of me crying in the photo album. And I was like, that's probably why I haven't cried for 14 years. I'm just guessing. So I need to like learn how to cry. And so I put that photograph on my desk, and this little kid crying, and I still have the photograph. And, you know, whatever, 6 months later, I still hadn't cried. So I was like, okay, well, what the fuck do I do now? And I had so much shame around it. And I lived in LA at the time. So I would go up to like 10,000 feet. Well, not 10,000, I guess it's like more like 8,000 feet. And then I would hike on a trail, and then I'd hike off trail, and then I'd pretend to cry because I didn't want anyone to hear me crying, and I would pretend to cry. And that was like 3 months, once or twice a week, I would go up and pretend to cry. And then one day it just broke free, and I just could.
You just kind of went through the physical motions until. How did you know it was going to work? Did you have like any guidance or anything?
I had none. No, and it's a super inefficient way to do it. There's so much better ways to get it done now that I know, but at the time that was my journey of it. The first step is you all have kids have emotions. Your kids have emotions. Probably what's upsetting you, and then it's like, oh, emotions need to be controlled. So then you're in the management of emotions. That's like the next stage. And then the next stage is to learn that you actually have them again. If you super manage them, you have to learn that you're like having them. And then in the awareness of learning what they are, there's a lack of a reactivity. So then there becomes this time when you start falling in love with all the emotional experiences, because you realize that if you don't do it at somebody, if they don't create shame, they're all really quite beautiful. The sensations of them are really quite beautiful. And if you let them move, you immediately get back to connection. You get back to a place of joy. I have a thing. It's that joy is the matriarch of a family of emotions, and she won't come into a house where her children aren't welcome. So if you see with your kids, you let them have a big temper tantrum, and it's like they move their emotion. They're like, all of a sudden, boop, oh, here I am, hi. And they're like right back to connection, and they're back to being joyful. They just needed to like have this thing move through their body. Adults are no different. And we just have all these things that like the emotion was shamed out of us, and we did it in such a way that we hurt somebody, and so that's bad, or somebody did it in a way that hurt us, so that's bad, so I'm not going to feel that. And so then slowly the emotions they almost all become one. It's hard to explain, but it's like it's like one big current that has, you know, is either ebbing or flowing, but there's a way in which it all feels like one thing that's moving. But there's no moment of waking that we have where we're not having an emotional experience. Yeah, we just can't identify it particularly sometimes.
You know, there's a question I've had for many years about my father that seems relevant here. He would tell us why he had to be so strict, you know?
Which means he felt shame about it.
Yeah.
He had to defend it.
Well, so there was a specific reason. There's just like a scenario he would always say so many times. It makes me think it was,
Can I guess?
yeah,
To keep you safe.
yes, exactly. Like even to the specificity of, like, he would say like, well, one day you're going to be running towards the street after a ball and there's going to be a car coming and I have to be able to say stop and you instantly come to a standstill. That exact scenario is what he would say. And I to this day, I don't know, that seems like a good reason, isn't it? Like what's,
Yeah, that seems like a good reason. For sure. I think my experience is that we don't expect obedience from our children. And when they are in danger and we say stop, they are attuned enough to know what stop means. They know when we're serious. They're attuned to us. Like, I mean, have you had this happen yet? Like you're having a hard day and you come in and you're in a bit of a mood and the kid goes, I love you, Daddy. Or mine used to literally like sit on my lap, grab my face and like,
yeah,
right?
the physical way. Yeah.
That's how fucking attuned they are to us. They're like, we know you're out of, your nervous system is out of regulation and I'm going to help you get back into regulation and be with us. That's how like native it is for them. So to have the idea that a kid doesn't know when you're like, stop, sorry, sound person, that they're not going to know that that's like, that's ridiculous.
This is almost related way back to the idea of empowerment. It's you're basically trusting the kid to know what's right and to know what to do in the situation rather than requiring you from afar to be intervening on their behalf.
What I would say is I would not ever say to trust them to do right because that like means that they're going to do what you think is right. But I would say I trust them to be attuned. I trust them to want to be in connection. I trust them to want to, what we might call a moral life, but like a life that feels aligned. Like lying doesn't feel good at a certain age. There's an age where they're exploring what's reality and what's not reality, but there's a way in which certain things just don't feel good to us. And I trust that they're human and that they feel those things, right? I don't need to tell them good job. They feel when they've done a good job. I will say, I see you did that. That's amazing. But I won't say good job to them because they know it. You know, we have never, I mean, you've met our kids. They're like, now one's 18, one's 15. Everybody who meets them is amazing. You can listen to the podcast. I have not once ever punished. And I think maybe a handful of times have shamed them. Maybe 5 times have I shamed them. And Tara the same way. Like there's an idea that kids are fucking bad and need to be like, why do teenagers hate parents? It's because the parents are basically coming at them with the idea of like, you're kind of fucked up and I need to control you. It's like, that's the message we're sending them. So they're like, yeah, okay, I'll be fucked up. instead of like, and I come at them with like, oh, of course you want to be connected. Who the fuck does not want to be connected to their parents? Like, and there's somebody listening to the podcast right now. It's like, yeah, no, I don't want to be connected to my parents because he was abusive, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I agree. Your parents are fuck. You don't want to be around them. I've been in that experience. But you want their love. You want to have a loving if you could push a button and say, I could have a relationship with a loving father right now, push it, you're going to push it. And so it's so in our nature. So all I'm doing is just trusting their nature.
You don't teach like any absolute moral lessons like do, don't, right, wrong, anything like that?
Correct. I don't.
Wow. That was such a huge part of my upbringing.
And if you look at my kids, they're far more, from the outside, look far more moral than most of their friends and teenagers. I do teach them things about like how emotions work and you know, like there's all, and like we talk about how humans interact and blah, 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 but I don't, I don't ever say this is right or this is wrong. I say, how does that feel? And the wrong stuff feels like shit.
Mm. You just help them notice that.
I just am teaching them how to listen to themselves. If you just listen, if kids just learn how to listen to themselves, then as humans general, right? Like if you look at like what in your mind you think is the most evil person in the world, it's like, how are they listening to themselves? Right? Are they cut off? Are they, yeah.
I see it. So this is really the conversation I most wanted to have. With my son, he's 3.5. I've made so much progress even before he was born, where I don't think his emotions trigger me, even anger, because of the anger work that I did. I'm now like, oh, that's cool. I can totally be with this. But there are these very specific moments that I can't allow. I can't accept. For example, he has this thing where randomly, sometimes in the most quiet, intimate moments, say putting him to bed, for no apparent reason, he'll just strike us in the face with his hands or his feet, me or my wife. I'm baffled by that. I can't find any cause or any reason for it or any way to stop it. Like, how would you even think about that?
So yeah, so that would be like he's not fully in his will yet, and he shouldn't be at the age that he is, right? So he's not fully like, oh, he's like, I'm frustrated, pump, instead of like, oh, I am in control of this situation. And so, but the way we would handle that generally was just like, oh, I can't let you hurt us. And we would hold them, contain them in a very gentle way, but I would contain them so that they couldn't, I can't let you hurt us or each other. So this is like the stay close and insist piece, which is like, I'm not going to punish you for punching me in the face, but I am going to make sure you don't do it. I'm the adult. That's not how we do it.
Just literally hold them in your embrace.
Yeah.
If they fight you, you just
great. That's fantastic.
hold tighter.
I would never, I'm sure once or twice I held them too tight, but the idea is to, like, as gently as possible, contain them when they're in that young age, because you're basically teaching them how to contain themselves. And then if they fight back, it's like, oh, great, that's the emotional release that they need.
Okay, this makes sense, and we have done a little bit of that. How about when you're not there, like he hits his sister a lot?
So I want to give everybody an example of the like thing. So there was a time when I think it was Esme, we're at a Whole Foods and she's like on a tear and I contain her. So I'm containing her and she's like, let me go, and this, we live in like somewhat of a hippie world, and at the time anyways, it's wine country, and this old lady is like, are you okay, to my daughter? And my daughter's like 3, maybe here, 2, something like that, 2.5, 3.5. And she looks up, she goes, I'm just having my emotions. And then she goes back to having the temperature. Like, that's how conscious it is in them. Like, right? They're like, this is the thing that's happening inside of them. They even understand it on some level. And so, and listen, there's like plenty of, with Patty who wrote it, she can tell you many stories like that are happening. So yeah, so I just to say that's a really, like, it's just containing them, but it's not hurting them. It's not feeling, and then they will fight. They'll do this fight, and then it's out of their system. And they're like, okay, boom, they're very emotionally fluid.
So if that's happening, let's say over there in the living room with his sister, you go over there, contain him.
So what I will do, and this is a trick from Listen, half the time I will go to him and say, I'm so sorry that I wasn't here to prevent you from hurting your sister. I know that's gotta suck, hurt. I know that doesn't feel good, probably is the wording I would use. It's been a while. And half the time I'll go to the sister and I'll say, I'm so sorry I wasn't here to protect you. That's gotta hurt.
Why is that? Why split it?
Because I don't want them identified like, oh, I get attention if I hit my sister. I get attention if I'm hit. And a perfect example. So one of the kids is, I think, 11 at this time. The other one's like 9, 8, 9, something. And the 9-year-old's in the bathroom crying. And sister and her had gotten in a fight. And I came in and I was like, are you sad? Or are you angry? She's like, I'm angry. I'm like, how often do you act sad when you're angry? She's like, about half the time. I'm like, why? Like, what's happening there? And she's like, well, my sister's bigger than me, so if I get angry, she just hits me. But if I get sad, then she feels guilty. She didn't say it articulate, but I think the way she articulated was, if I feel sad, I get what I want, some version of. And it was like, oh, right. So that's what happens if like you always go and protect and you're the bad person. And so what I'm doing in that situation is I'm taking away the bad and the good. You're not bad, you're not good. This is just nature happening, and I'm going to take that on. I'm sorry that I wasn't there. So I'm not making anybody the bad person or the good person, nobody the victim. I'm not creating an identity for them.
Wow. What you just described about anger and sadness is exactly my case. My dad responded very well to tears. So I learned all anger, nearly 100%, has to be like transmuted to sadness, to the point that I couldn't feel anger, only sadness.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly.
And I see that I'm recreating that in our family a bit.
Yeah. Right. And you said you're pretty good with all the emotions, but you also said that you're not really great with the real positive ones, the like super excitement or the...
Actually, yeah. Enthusiasm is tough.
Enjoyment times 2 or 3, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Because the funny thing about that sadness thing is sadness became my home base emotion. Right. When I want to be happy or even feel motivated, I listen to super sad, melancholy songs. Right. I'm like, yeah, I'm pumped. And then people see my Spotify, they're like, your motivational playlist is like sad piano music? Well, that's strange. Okay, wow. So I realize a couple things. One is I have a little bit of judgment that he shouldn't do that. He shouldn't hit us. It's bad. It's morally wrong.
Right.
I can feel like the heaviness of that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Which is transferring to heaviness to him. Like in a weird way, what you're saying, if he's attuned, which he is by nature, he feels that he's bad. And kids end up being what you tell them they're going to be.
Wow. Say more about that.
Kids who are told they're naughty, they like grow up naughty. Like kids who are, you're such a good girl. They grow up to be a good girl, like instead of themselves. They get trapped into this identity. Like a perfect example of this is my mom and dad tested us for IQ and creativity, my sister and I. And they decided I'm the smart one and she's the creative one. And so she was like, okay, you should play piano and you should do art. And I should like not do that stuff because I wasn't good at it. And I should do the intellectual stuff. And both of us like completely rebelled at some point. And so she started doing intellectual stuff. I started doing creative stuff. It was later on in life that I found out what the scores were. And the scores were like potentially not even statistically different. We were both like well into a very clear percentage. And so it was what was the case was we were both very creative and we were both very smart according to the test, whatever those are. But like they identified us that way. And so we didn't believe in ourselves. Like I didn't believe I could do a creative thing and she didn't believe she could do smart things. And like even, so anyways, that's just kind of how it moved. And so how we identify kids is like, it becomes who they think they are, but it's not true.
Another thing I'm realizing is reading the Listen book. I think I took away maybe not the best conclusion. So the sort of background of that whole book is connection. That connection is like the water that kids swim in. That's what they always need. And so I've been thinking, oh, well, if Caillou, our son, hits me or Lauren, there's not enough connection. So we need to spend more time together in like attentive play and you know, face-to-face eye contact and all these things. But we spent, both me and Lauren spend hours a day. We have the the most time together. And I don't just mean around each other, like playing face to face.
You go,
So I'm
you
like,
go, you go down the rabbit hole with them.
yes,
Yeah,
so
that's
far down.
so fun. Yeah.
So it's the best time of my day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's the best. But then I think I'd have to not work. There's no way I can dedicate more time or more attention to give them more connection. And so we've turned to consequences. Oh, I need to shape his behavior by every time he does this, this happens, and he learns that he doesn't want that consequence.
Right. So there are natural consequences that help them learn. But I just don't create them. I just don't protect them from the natural consequences. You know, there's a time when like kids will start yelling at you to get you to do shit. And then, like, they'll yell at you and I'll be like, yeah, if an adult yelled at me, I wouldn't do stuff. So I'm not doing stuff. Right. So like, it's like, what's the actual natural reaction? Like if they were adults in the world doing this, what's the natural reaction that they would face? And I would just do that as an example.
In some situations, that works super well. Yeah. You just let the consequence happen. What about things like he gets, a cup full of milk and pours it all over the couch?
Right. So he would clean it up with me, just on a solution that there would be a cleanup. There would be like taking the stuff out of the cushion, and there would be putting the vinegar in the cushion. There would be like a whole thing, and I would stay close and insist. So that would be the natural consequence of that.
And do it with them, in connection with them.
Exactly. But I want to kind of, I don't see it as my job is to provide connection for the kid. Is like their little connection machines, and everything they do naturally is to get back into connection.
That's such an important distinction.
Right. So it's not different than the employee situation, right? It's like, it's not your job to have them, to give them connection. It's your job to be there for them in their natural connection movement path.
So if at the age of 3 or 3.5, when they're sort of like you're their whole world, yeah, and you can just see they need connection, yeah, you don't necessarily just go in and provide that. What's another way that you could?
Well, the question would be, what is it that they're doing that makes you think they need connection?
I would say sort of like acting out, hitting things, throwing things.
So I would be like, okay, let's really act out. Let's go get angry. Or I'd draw a boundary so that they would naturally get angry, and then I would,
We've tried that a few times, and he never does it with us. He just sort of stands there as we're like, hitting pillows or whatever.
While you're doing it with him.
Well, we've tried to sort of like do it like, come along with me. Like, here's a pillow, and we like hit the pillow on the couch or whatever. He's never really followed along.
So usually they'll follow along more when they're a little bit older. When they're that age, oftentimes you just have to draw the boundary that pisses them off, but it's true for you. And then they'll get angry, and then they'll come back. So I think that the interesting thing is kids really, really want boundaries. That's not discipline. And there's a distinction for me. So a boundary is like, no, we're not going to do that. It's the same thing in the business that we were talking about, which is just like, yeah, nothing's going to happen that I think is crappy in my company. But that doesn't mean I have to get my way. It's a similar thing. It's just like, there's a boundary with your child that is like, yeah, we're not doing that right now. We're not hitting our sisters. I won't let you hurt yourself. There's just clear boundaries. You don't have to discipline them. There doesn't have to be a consequence. There's just stay close and insist. And when you do that in a gentle, with still an open heart, they will get angry. And that's their nature. And and then they will be back in connection. And so I'm following their thing. They're telling me, meh, 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 meh. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I hear it. Meh, 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 meh. And then they're like, and then I provide a situation where they can really, and then they're like, okay, back in connection.
And sometimes it can take a while.
First couple times can take a while. Pretty soon it's always kind of under 20 minutes is my experience.
Wow. What about if you don't? I feel like much of the time I don't have the time. Like, I'm cooking dinner, Lauren is putting Delia to sleep, and it's like I know, well, this is what the Listen book would recommend, but like those evenings are just so chaotic, It's usually right the moment that he chooses to do something that attracts a lot of attention.
So a whole bunch of things there. You just said he chooses. And then he said to get a bunch of attention. So all of those I would like question. I would say the house is dysregulated. He feels out of connection and he is trying to figure out how to get back into connection. And it's dysregulated because this stuff is happening. It's a stressful moment in the house. And so he's like, and he's like dysregulated trying to get back into connection. So I'm not giving him choice in it. Like choosing means he's choosing something wrong or right. And I'm not saying that it's for attention. I'm saying that he, like all humans, are just trying to get their needs met. And this is how he knows to do it. And it's our job to teach him other ways to get their needs met that actually feel deeply aligned so that he can learn those things.
But what if in that moment you just can't? Like, what if you just can't? Yeah. Either for time or sometimes it's just like your own emotional capacity. Right. I had a really hard day. Like, right. I'm at zero. I have nothing to give. Those are the moments that I feel most at a loss. Like, I know what I could do or should do, but I can't. I just can't.
Yeah. So hopefully there's a trick to structuring a day so that like mom has capacity when dad doesn't have capacity. That's like incredibly helpful to have somebody have the capacity in that moment. There are definitely times when neither person has capacity. And you can't always be perfect, and that's also part of the job. So you're not perfect and then you apologize. So that's not how I want to be with you. But most likely what's happening in those moments is he has a feeling that you have that you don't want to feel. So for instance, I would be cooking and I'd be like, breakfast on Sunday morning. And the way that I cook, I'm trying to change this, but I always seem to not do the way that I cook is like, I don't sit down and prep everything and then start cooking. I just like, oh, I've got the eggs out, start frying those. And so, so there's always some moment where it's like the toast is burning and da-da-da-da. And those would be when the kids would start doing the thing because they're feeling me out of regulation. And I don't want to feel that at that moment. But what I learned is literally I would stop and I would go, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. And I remember one time, like my daughter looking at me, she goes, that was some pretty good anger, Dad. And then the whole house was regulated again. So most likely what's happening is he's feeling something for you that you're feeling, or you're feeling it together, however you want to say that. But you're trying not to feel it in yourself. And so the overwhelm isn't the actuality of like cooking the dinner or putting someone to sleep. The overwhelm is I have an emotional experience I don't want to fucking feel. And the spiritual journey of raising kids is they point that out in no uncertain terms, and then you get to feel it.
Wow. Yeah.
And then you become emotionally fluid again.
I have noticed like we've been influenced like by gentle parenting. And I think that gets misinterpreted a lot of ways. But what is so helpful and also effective is to just tell them what you're feeling. Like we started saying, Caillou, I'm getting frustrated. Yeah. That brings him to a complete standstill. Much better than like trying to like deny that you're frustrated. Be like, oh, let's go to school. Yeah, we're gonna have a fun day. Like trying to convince him. Just be like, Caillou, I'm starting to get frustrated. I'm starting to get stressed or angry, whatever. He sometimes doesn't even know what the word means that we just said. And he's like, he'll ask, like, what does that mean? What is frustrated? What is like, he'll try to say it.
Yeah. This continues to work all the way through teenage years. Just by the way, like, it's amazing how, like, for instance, I fell into like a bit of a nagging thing in the early teenage years. At some point I'm like, okay, you don't like me nagging, and nagging feels like shit to me. So how do we do this? How do we create a situation where no nagging is necessary? And how many parents literally tell their kids, nagging feels like shit. I don't like it. It frustrates me. I don't want to be the cop in the house. This sucks. So it just continues to work to like name your emotional experience, because all of our natures is to feel in connection with ourselves and the other person, and so ourselves and our family. And so if if you make them choose between connection with themselves and connection with the family, they're going to choose connection with themselves. It's going to be distorted, but they're going to choose it. But you don't have to give them that. That choice isn't necessary. You can have both.
You can have both.
Yeah.
Wow. Joe, I feel like that's a beautiful moment to end on. There's been so many phrases and ideas in this conversation that I'm going to carry with me for a long time. I will be rewatching this video alongside you. Thank you for being here. And for anyone watching or listening who wants to find out more about you, your work, your courses, where should they go?
Artofaccomplishment.com, FU Joe Hudson on Twitter, and then Joe Hudson on YouTube.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is Joe and Tiago. Joe and Tiago, take one.
Just want to be a part of it.